Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show on this Saturday, middle of the day, the 14th of September, 2019. And I'll be at WPIX TV this evening, so you can watch me there if you're in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metro area. If you're not, you can catch it online at pix11.com. And the weathercast is on there, so if you want to see what I look like on television, that's what I look like. That's after I'm all put together. So we've got Humberto, which developed last night. We saw the reconnaissance aircraft that was out there after 8 o'clock last night, showing right after we were done with our Joe Rayo and I were done with our live stream. The reconnaissance aircraft was reporting winds of 40 to 45 knots, so it was pretty much a no-brainer that it was going to be a tropical storm. And now it's rather close to Abaco Island. It hasn't really moved much today, but it is of tropical storm strength and not Category 5 hurricane strength, which obviously makes a huge difference. So let's get started here. By the way, let me just mention real quick off the top, which I don't often do, but additional weather coverage for the weather geeks among you is always available on my weather platform on Patreon. It's just $2 a month, but you get a lot of extra stuff, including extra videos, extra posts, and you can message me at any time. And I'm putting the link here up on the chat. Also, you can download my free weather app, which is free for all mobile devices. And it's also it'll work just about everywhere in the U.S. The Android device will default to your location. The iPhone device, you're going to have to put your location in until I can get Apple to finally put through this update that they haven't put through in the last 2 months. So, but ultimately it'll go to your location automatically. All right, the link is up for that also on the chat board. So let's get started here. We are, of course, watching this tropical storm, which it really from here is going to be a non-event. We talked yesterday about the upper air in the east being all wrong, and I know he's probably not on here, but Weather Enlow mentioned that someone else had said that Humberto was not going to go out to the east. I don't. The concept of forecast shopping to me is odd. Okay, if that's what other people whatever they say. Okay. I'm saying what I say, and I just wanted to kind of put that on the table. I guess I have to mention that every once in a while. I really don't pay attention to what other weather people are doing, particularly when I'm in a work mode, because I don't like to have my my thoughts biased by someone who could very well be right, and I could very well be wrong, but you got to kind of learn certain things on your own. So here's the loop this morning, and one of the things you can pick out on this is you can actually see the exposed circulation center here. It's always interesting when you look at these tropical storms. When you look at first glance on a satellite without looking close, you see all this convection, and you think that the center is somewhere in there underneath that convection, and your mind wants to take you where it's in the middle. But in fact, most times it is not the case unless it's a really well-developed tropical system that is symmetrical, but the actual circulation is right on the edge here of the convection, and you can pick out that low-level swirl that is there. So it's telling us that it's still got some issues with regards to wind shear, and if you look on the in the Gulf of Mexico, you can see clouds and some showers and thunderstorms. That's that big upper low that is spitting up there. And Johnny Quest, one of our regulars, asked me yesterday about whether this might become something tropical. And my thoughts yesterday, and they kind of still are today, is that this is such a cold core system that goes all the way up in the atmosphere that it's going to be a really tough sell to pull that off. But the Hurricane Center actually did mention that in their discussion today about the system in the Gulf moving westward and it may take a good portion of this week to get it across, this coming week to get it across. But maybe when it gets into the Western Gulf, conditions might be more conducive. And also, I would like to point out that if you think back to when we had Dorian, remember there was a low and an upper low in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Eastern Gulf, that moved westward and set up an excellent outflow pattern for Dorian. And here I've said many times that when you're in your weather patterns, they don't repeat exactly, but they do have a tendency to rhyme a bit. And this system, though weaker, impacting virtually the same area of the Bahamas that we saw Dorian impact just a little over a week or so ago. So it's quite astounding sometimes to see that that similarity. The surface observations aren't really they're not really telling us very much, because the actual circulation of Humberto is just east of Abaco Island in the ocean. But as we said, there's not a whole lot happening on the west side. It looks like there's a band of heavy rain moving over parts of Grand Bahama Island. And we don't have that many observations, and this could be a factor of Dorian knocking weather observation posts out of commission for a while. So all we have is Settlement Point, and they're northeast at 14 miles an hour, and Nassau at the airport is west at 10. But the fact that there's a west wind here tells you that there's a circulation, because in this area of the globe, you especially in the summer and fall and into the early to mid fall months, the primary wind is east or northeast. You hardly ever see anything other than that, and to see a west wind is a signature of an obvious a counterclockwise circulation. So that's why it's so important. Even if it's only a 5 or 10 mile an hour wind, it's telling you that there is a circulation there. Now here's the look from the eastern satellite view, the Atlantic satellite view, so you can see what's going on in the northeast and all the way down to where Humberto is. And notice, by the way, it's very far off the Florida coast here. This is not anywhere close or causing any big problems to the Florida coast. So we're not concerned about that. The Hurricane Center has taken down the tropical storm watches that were up for Jupiter Inlet on up to the Volusia County line. So they're done. And I don't think there's going to be any real threat here to the southeast. We are seeing the next system coming into the east, and that is bringing some clouds today. Right here, there's a cold front / upper trough. It's not really very much of a cold front, mainly because of the fact that ahead of the front we've had onshore winds, and that has created relatively cool conditions, whereas the air behind it is coming from the plains, which is dry and actually on the warm side. So we're going to see higher temperatures after this weak cold front comes through. Then we're going to see higher temperatures behind it than we are seeing ahead of it, where a lot of my area today that I cover is sitting in the 60s and 70s. Just take a look at bring the observations back up as of midday. And by the way, you can see the radar echoes showing a little line of showers here that is ahead of another area that's out in central PA. There probably will be some scattered spot showers around for the area from eastern Pennsylvania, from the eastern half of Pennsylvania down into Maryland and over into southern New England. But most of the time, it won't be doing much of anything. And much of this is on the light side. Now tonight we could see a heavier shower or thunderstorm as that front goes by. But you can see the temperatures here. They're mostly a function of coming in off the ocean, that they've warmed up into the low 70s. And actually along the immediate coast, we've had a fair amount of sunshine here where I am on Long Island up until a short time ago. So we've seen our temperatures actually boost up into the low and mid 70s. But the inland spots that have been under a lot of clouds are in the 60s, and even in some cases, as you go further north up into New England, we're looking at some places in the low 60s. So it's not really all that warm ahead of this. And then behind it, where you start to get into some sunshine, you're seeing temperatures that are in the upper 60s and low 70s. And of course, they'll be warming up as they go through the day, whereas the numbers in the east won't be moving at all. So our air is coming from a place where it's going to be heated up a bit, and it is relatively dry. So to Sunday and Monday, look for some higher temperatures. Now, on the wider U.S. view, you see the system moving across southern Canada, the frontal system that's in the east, the Gulf upper low, which is now far enough west that the shear has relaxed, where Humberto is strengthened a little bit, but still having some impact with regards to producing some wind shear. This is ultimately going to disappear, the wind shear is, and we're going to see this system strengthen a bit. Radar at midday, you see those spot showers in the east, some showers off the Carolina coast. Down in Florida, you're getting a couple of bands moving westward from the overall circulation of the tropical storm to the east and the deep upper low to the west. Actually, if you notice the rain that's out in the Gulf of Mexico from the upper low, from what we can see that's in radar range, looks more impressive than the rain that is approaching Bahamas, where they have a tropical storm warning. But that usually is how the game is played. Otherwise, the west is dry. You can see some patchy thunderstorms in a few places, including a batch moving out of Nebraska and into Iowa, and another batch down in southernmost New Mexico and on the Mexico side. So here's the latest advisory: 26.6, 76.7. Top winds are 50 miles an hour. Movement from the Hurricane Center advisory is stationary. It doesn't look like it's moved very much this morning, but eventually it's going to resume this northwest or north-northwest course and then take a sharp right turn and become a hurricane. And it'll probably make a relatively close pass to Bermuda sometime on Wednesday, the way it looks. And I really don't think there's any possibility of this coming northward, and I'll explain why here. We're going to look at we'll look at the old GFS model run. The new one's coming out, but I want to take a look. We're going to look at the upper air, and I'll take the Atlantic view. And I mentioned yesterday that the only chance you had was if this deep trough, and here's this trough that moved through here through the Northeast Thursday night, and for yesterday that brought in that beautiful high and the onshore flow. So now you've got the ridge popping up, and here we are this morning with with Humberto sitting out in the Bahamas, and it's right there. You also have a upper high, and actually it covers a lot of territory, but it's a rather, what I would always call a flat ridge. It's not built all the way up into the northern latitudes. It's just this sort of narrow, it almost looks like a snake that is just kind of stretched east to west. And it's narrow because you go north of Virginia, and now you're talking about the westerly winds in the upper atmosphere. And you have this upper trough that's dropped down south of Newfoundland at the same time. So that's what the upper air pattern looks like for this morning. And as we move forward, I'm going to leave this on there so you can see how it changes. The ridge in the Atlantic starts to weaken, and Humberto responds to, there is a second shortwave. So you get the idea that it changes when we go into Tuesday. So I'm going to take this off for a moment. Let's get rid of it. And you're going to see the second shortwave coming into northern New England. And that drops down near Newfoundland and really produces a rather strong upper low and trough in the Atlantic from Newfoundland southwestward toward Bermuda. And what happens is that the tropical system is just far enough north, and the trough to the north extends, its influence extends just far enough south that you wind up having it it pulls it toward this easterly flow that is out. I'm sorry, this westerly flow that is out in the Atlantic. The southern extent of those westerly winds make it fairly far south into Virginia and then extend out into the coastal waters. But the influence of that trough is so strong that you wind up seeing it pulling it up toward the east. And the trough out in the Atlantic really doesn't move very much. And in fact, if right here on Wednesday, there's actually a second shortwave that comes around. And you can pick it out right there is a second shortwave that swings around and drops southward. And this is going to probably bring a reinforcement of drier air into the northeast and mid-Atlantic states for the latter part of this coming week, depending on how that whole thing just plays out. But as far as Humberto is concerned, now you've got really strong westerlies, is the general what the general term is for winds blowing across the Atlantic that generally go from west to east. In this case, they are pretty close to going west to east. Sometimes they go southwest to northeast. But the bottom line is the extent of that trough is so dominant, and the ridge in the Atlantic is so weak at this point that this system has no place to go but to move out to the east or the east-northeast and just accelerate away. So I really think, I was thinking yesterday, if it winds up staying underdeveloped, you could make a case for it perhaps missing that trough, but if that second short wave is correct, weak or not, it's not going to miss that. Now, I would point out that you still have a ridge out in the Atlantic, and the models seem to be having difficulties figuring out, there's several tropical waves that are out here, and one, in fact, just merged with another one. So we may be just down to two, but the bottom line is that there is a lot of activity going on out there, and weather models are having a kind of a difficult time right now figuring out which of these is real, which of these is not, which of them has the best potential to develop. You've got some models developing these systems on one run, only not to have them develop in another. So it's kind of hard to really get a sense over which one of these waves is going to be more important. And I think the best approach with that is to simply just let the satellite tell you. I'm just kind of looking at the loop here at the moment out in the tropical Atlantic, and I'm just, these waves are out there, but nothing looks like it's ready to go anytime soon. You also have a couple of upper lows running around in a few places, so we'll have to see if there are some wind shear issues. But the Hurricane Center seems to be focused more on the wave that's furthest to the east, and that one is one that they're giving a 60% chance of developing into something. This was two waves, and now they're calling saying it's just one wave that they sort of merged together. You can also see the arc of the clouds around the upper low in the Gulf of Mexico that is still spinning around over there. And of course, here's our tropical system. It's funny when you look at this, the tropical system and the cold core system actually don't look. They have a certain similar look to them in terms of the arc of the clouds, and one of them is clearly warm core, and that's the Humberto, and one of them is clearly cold core, at least for now. Although we do see some convection there forming near what would be the upper center. I don't think there's any kind of low-level circulation here that would cause concern. But it's just kind of funny how they have that sort of. They do have a similar look to them out on the satellite. So, but there is a distinct difference between the two. So you get the idea here in terms of the upper air. It's just not going to be supported for anything too problematic. And I want to at least come back home in terms of the overall longer-term pattern, which I thought was kind of interesting from the overnight run, in that Gradually, as we go through the next 2 weeks, we're going to see the trough swing into the east, into the eastern part of the United States. And I would just point out that on this run from last night, the GFS obviously keyed on a second tropical system developing, and it turns it northward along or just west of 60 degrees west. And you'll notice, by the way, if this is right, and I'm not saying it is, but the GFS drops this deep trough down into Illinois and into Kentucky and Tennessee. Now, if there's any kind of reality to this, which we're not even 100% sure that it is, but I just want to illustrate. I oftentimes say, I've been saying with Dorian and with this system how the upper air is all wrong. Well, here's a situation where if something is timed in the right spot, where the upper air would take anything that is in this position here, would take it pretty much straight up the East Coast. This is 10 days from now. The upper pattern is going to look like this, according to the GFS. And we still don't know that it is, but I want to just illustrate here that in this instance, the GFS has a tropical system along 60. But if we were to see something from here that would somehow find its way to just east of the Bahamas, then you could perhaps have something that is more problematic. I mentioned this a couple of days ago, that it's probably a good idea to keep an eye on how the upper air evolves over the next 3 or 4 days with regards to what the models are doing. We have an upper high out in the Atlantic. If that winds up being stronger, perhaps we could see a tropical system gain some some longitude here. And also, if it's not as developed, one of the reasons why the GFS takes this simulated hurricane, as you may want to call it, where it takes it is because it develops it into a hurricane pretty far to the south, and responding to the more to the upper level flow than the lower level flow, it tends to move further north. So perhaps we would wind up with something weaker, in which case you may have something that gets further west before it develops, and that was what models were doing for quite a while. So just want to bring that up. That's kind of what we're going to be looking for in subsequent runs. Excuse me. And so basically the whole idea with the models is trying to bring this the trophic into the east toward the last week of the month. And that will not only make things pretty interesting, but also when you look at what the upper pattern looks like here with this type of a setup, we're going to start to see some cooler air masses coming down, and not just the onshore flow type air masses, but some cooler air masses coming down out of Canada. So very quickly, with the weather for the week coming up, I'm just not really seeing too much going on here. The west, by the way, is going to get a little bit of, there's a little snow there on Tuesday in northwestern Wyoming. But it's been dry and warm, and the trough is in the west, so there's going to be at least some attempt for some moisture here later next week as a low tries to come across near the border. So you can see it there up near the Dakotas. In the meantime, here in the east, so we've got our week front, or whatever you want to call it, for today, Sunday and Monday, look to be on the warm side, and then we've got there's another front here that comes through for Monday evening, late Monday afternoon, Monday evening. This is just like what we went through yesterday. And there's going to be another high that builds up in New England and upstate New York. Not quite as strong as the one we just had, but it does push this frontal boundary down further south into, I have it actually, I probably drew it a little bit too far south here, but you could make a case for it to be someplace like this. And of course, Humberto is underneath on the tropical side, on the warm side, and that's going to be heading out to the east. And we've got this high with an onshore flow, and that's going to mean for some reasonable cool weather again for Tuesday into Wednesday. And then you're going to get this next low that runs up into Canada. There's your high. Not only does it get into eastern Canada, but then builds southward as we go through the rest of the week. So much of this week, other than that there could be a passing shower, which might happen on Wednesday night into Wednesday night with the upper trough that is swinging down from the system off of Newfoundland that's going to kick Humberto out to the east-northeast. So that might bring a shower here. One maybe late Monday with the cold front coming by, another one late on Wednesday. And then really there's not much that's going to happen through much of next week. We may have to wait till the following week, the week of starting Monday, September 23rd and beyond, before we start to see anything of consequence happening. It's a very, very calm pattern. Just take a look at here. We're at September 26th. I mean, across the United States, virtually from coast to coast, except for a few showers being indicated. I know this is far out in the long range, but this is September. You don't have, unless you have a tropical system in play, the atmosphere really is calming down. The daytime heating is getting cut way back. You're not quite there yet where you're bringing down cold systems from Canada to create to create setups where you get overrunning precip. So we're kind of in a no man's land here, and typically September and October are uneventful months, and at least in where I am in my neck of the woods. It's the two driest months are September and the month of October. So look, the bottom line is the weather for the weekend's okay. It's not perfect, but it's okay, and we'll just go forward with that. The chairman, Scott Briller, thank you so much, Scott, hitting a super chat. Really appreciate it greatly. And let me bring the window down. There we go. Having these live streams in the middle of the day is a little, I'm not used to it. But I didn't have much choice. It was either that or, do one at after midnight tonight, where I know most people won't be up. The GFS has been showing a hurricane in the Pacific in the long term. Okay, which Pacific? Well, the whole east or the west Pacific, but actually that's a good thing to take a look at. And I'm where are we? Get that over here. Oh, I got to turn this off. All right, so let's look at the Pacific. One of the drivers in getting the trough in the east is you see a lot of typhoons in the Pacific, in the North Pacific, and we looked at this the other day. I think it's probably a good opportunity to look at it again. So you can just kind of see a parade of weak lows here in the long range. So I'll go back to the short range. And you still have a parade of weak lows. You do have something that was moving off Japan that deepens and heads up toward the Aleutians, but that doesn't look to be tropical. And then you've got a couple of systems here that recurve. The recurving storms cause usually energize a upper low in the Gulf of Alaska, where you wind up with a trough along 160 west going down to Hawaii. That tends to produce a big ridge in the west, and it tends to drop a trough in the east. And that's why we look at these things. At least the last night's run has a lot of weaker systems, but we don't see any major typhoons out in the West Pacific. This is another situation of dealing with models where you've got something being shown. You see them on a couple of runs and then they sort of disappear, and that's why you got to be careful putting too much stock into what models are doing. And I guess there's enough. Let me just really quick, we could do this, and I'm going to just maybe look at the chat one more time and take a couple of more questions, and then I got to go because I got to get ready to drive into Manhattan. But let's take a look at the new GFS just to see, just for laughs. And no, you know what? Let's look at it from the Atlantic side. And we'll put the precip on here. So we're only at 102 hours. So I don't expect to see too much different. There's Humberto moving to the east and east-northeast, getting closer to Bermuda. And you can also see that the GFS does start to develop as early as tomorrow night, begins to develop one of those tropical waves. So it does actually have by Wednesday, right in here, east of the leewards, a 984 pressure. So it's showing either a very strong tropical storm or a minimal hurricane at that point. And it's already moving west-northwestward. So if you want to draw a line, just draw a straight line, it would head in this direction and pass north of the islands. But the critical question to me is the fact that, is it correct with showing such a well-developed low? Because if it's weaker, it's going to respond maybe a bit more. You've got this high that is out southeast of the Azores that is built back at least to about 60 degrees west. The other issue, by the way, through anything that develops right now with this hurricane, with this potential Hurricane Humberto, where it is, which is only at about 32 or 33 degrees north and moving out on an east-northeast direction, it leaves troughing behind. It leaves weakness behind in the upper atmosphere, which is, and in the middle atmosphere as well. So if you do have something, it's going to probably want to turn east of 60 or along 60 rather than come far enough west to have impacts on any land areas. So if something does develop, how strong it is, I think is going to be rather critical to how far west it ever gets. And if you wind up with something that starts getting wrapped up, you're going to take a system that's going to recurve out along 60. And also, this is another lesson for everybody. Thou shalt not look at the long-range GFS with tropical storms past the 5 or 6 day time frame with any degree of seriousness. Mr. Hurley, you may like the European better than the GFS, and I can certainly accept that argument. I would also apply it, though, to the European, because the models, once you go past that day 5 or 6 time frame, you're going to have there's too much variability to put a whole lot of faith in them. And the European, by the way, with respect to further development in the tropical Atlantic, isn't showing very much. It doesn't seem to be picking up on either one of those waves. I would just argue back that the global models have always had a long history of not handling tropical systems well in both directions. So just because it doesn't develop, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be there. So just bear that in mind. Okay, Jason Schaefer, you are talking to Jersey Jeff, and that is a good thing. Jason Barry is already looking to snowstorms for the winter. That isn't even here yet. But if Jason, take a look at the C, I think, what is it, the CFS, one of those, or the CANSIPS. It basically has us going into an ice age beginning in December and lasting right through next August. So, which and let me just say right off the bat, when it comes to those climate models, I don't really have much use to them unless they support a notion that I already have in my head that I figured out. That I figured out it from out of seeing what's happening in the short and the mid range. They're fun to look at, but they're just not really all that useful. All right, folks, it's a little after 12 noon, midday. So, of course, everybody, whatever you've seen here, if you're watching it on a replay, obviously it's dated. So be sure to check for the latest weather information by going to weather.gov and your local National Weather Service office. Or if it comes to tropical systems, you can certainly go to the National Hurricane Center's website, nhc.noaa.gov. All right, so have a great day. Catch me on Pix. We'll live stream at some point tomorrow, unless it's a snooze fest, in which case maybe I'll take the day off and wait till Monday. But we'll see. All right, Anthony, I'll answer your question separately. Just message me, all right, because I got to run. Have a great day, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Oh, by the way, we will have a Weather in 5 tomorrow morning, regardless of whether I live stream or not on Sunday.